Deep breaths. Okay, I implore you to watch this video until the end so that you can leave the most informative comment humanly possible. This is your Day X World War III update. As many of you guys know, I have long since been a skeptic and a critic of the Biden administration and their foreign policy, usually to the detriment of this channel with the algorithm and to the ire of groups like the North American Fellas Organization, aka NAFO, who routinely plague the comments with their vitriolic accusations that I'm some kind of Putin sympathizing apparatchik shill. I do this because I know that in order to make valid inferences about the future, that you need to remain objective here in the present, even if that means speaking truth to power. In the same way, I've been critical of the Trudeau administration. I oftentimes will do so tangentially or even comedically, so to minimize the inflammation of any political hostilities that are currently reaching a fever pitch on the North American continent. I'm not trying to feed in to political rage bait. I'm not trying to divide people on this channel. And in the same way that I criticize those two, I will continue to criticize the new Conservative government when they take power here in Canada, which it appears that they will whenever an election happens. That's Pierre Poilievre and his Conservatives. And I most certainly will not tiptoe around anybody's political sensitivities about Trump. So I'm warning you right now, if you're going to be a snowflake and melt at the slightest suggestion, not even a criticism, but the suggestion that the Trump administration is doing something wrong, then I suggest you just unsubscribe, because I'm going to piss you off in the next 4 years, and quite frankly, I don't give a shit anymore. I have no patience to cater to the lowest common denominator of person who gets upset about those types of things. If you have been subdued by the demagoguery and the belief that is being perpetrated, that all of the crises that have been compounding over the last 4 years, decades even before that, will suddenly just be remedied by the stroke of a magic wand, then you're delusional. If you think World War III is over because Trump is here, my friend, you got another thing coming. Nothing pisses me off more than Trump derangement syndrome, because it is inaccurate, because it exaggerates, and because it's unfair, it's unjust. In the same way, something pisses me off equally, and that's this idolatry that we're currently seeing with Trump, where if you say anything, people lose their fucking minds. And again, I'm not pandering to that for 4 years. If you think I am, you got another thing coming. So click the unsubscribe button right now if you're going to start shitting your pants and crying every time I take a jab at the orange man. Because I did it for 4 years with Biden. In fact, that's what's compelled me to do these daily updates, was the shitstorm that we've been in. People were fine with that. The reason why I want to make this video today, again, everybody thinks everything's fine now. That's delusional thinking. The energy of World War III has simply been redirected to another part of the chessboard, and that most certainly is Iran. Iran is a ticking time bomb on every possible metric. Every placement that Trump has made so far revolves around Israel. We'll get to that on another day. What I want to focus on and debunk and demystify today is this claim that Trump is going to end the war with Russia and Ukraine. You got another thing coming, and I'm going to give you about 16 or so reasons why that is complete and utter bullshit. Not because I want it to be true, but it's because it's reality. If you think that a situation like this could be so easily resolved by one guy making a deal, again, I got some bridges to sell you up here in the boreal forest of northern Saskatchewan. I want to read you something. This is by Paul Craig Roberts, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. I don't agree with everything Paul Craig Roberts says, but I got to say, he's a pretty wise man when it comes to geopolitics and his predictions. This is what he has to say, and this is what people need to think about, because it seemed very unusual for me that the Democrats threw that election in the way they did. I've already made a video about that. I'm not going to touch on that much today. But here is what he has to say. Trump could be maneuvered into pro-war positions and would be more successful in marshaling public support than a Democratic candidate like Kamala Harris. Imagine Trump rallying the troops. Imagine the guy who said, fight, fight, fight. The commander-in-chief rallying the troops. That's what we're talking about here. If you need somebody to marshal forces for World War III, is it going to be Kamala or is it going to be Trump? Stick with me. They, the U.S. establishment, need a charismatic, populist firebrand to boost recruitment and spearhead the rush to war. Harris can't do that. We've seen some of the people in the U.S. military lately, and they don't look like they're fit for the front lines, if you catch my drift. Harris had trouble attracting even 100 supporters to her rallies. I think that's a bit of an overstatement, but we'll let it slide. It would be easy to seduce Americans into a new military adventure if they are led by a popular leader, warned former Ronald Reagan official Dr. Paul Craig Roberts on his website. Mega Americans, he says, are tired of losing wars. Russia, oh, this is different news. Russia has reportedly had its deadliest day in Ukraine with 2,000 soldiers yesterday. Now, that's Ukrainian news. Nonetheless, I feel it is still pertinent. But you see what he's saying there. So part of the logic for having Trump is that he can marshal forces in a way that nobody else could, so long as the precedent is there. So long as there's a black enough black swan event that compels us and gives us a reason to go to war. And we're about to see that in the Middle East. But it could honestly happen anywhere. That's the thing. We could see another 9/11 style event. I mean, we've basically created the conditions out there and the radicalization of a lot of people on the basis of what has been going on, not only in the Middle East, but in Russia as well, and even in Asia to a certain extent, that now the seeds have been planted for some terrorist activity. But these are 16 reasons why war with Russia is still very much going to escalate, even under Trump. Contrary to any political niceties exchanged between the Trump administration and the Putin one, there have been numerous things that have happened in Trump's last term with Russia that were very escalatory. We're talking about things like sanctions, export restrictions, the banning of certain products, specifically cybersecurity products, providing weapons to Ukraine, being the first president to provide the heavy types of weapons to Ukraine, the missile launchers, the javelins and the stingers, things like that. Of course, Trump abandoned the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. Now, a lot of these things were under the supervision of Mike Pompeo at the time, who, of course, has not been selected for that role right now. Regardless, all of this stuff happened on Trump's watch. We're talking about released oligarchs lists, leaked intelligence about some controversies and potential, what would you call it, just bad shenanigans going on in Russia, okay? military action in Syria that actually killed Russian-backed troops, indictments for influence operations, expulsion of Russian diplomats and intelligence officers. Pompeo himself rejected the annexation of Crimea, although Trump was a bit more sympathetic to that. So that is one. That's number one, okay, that there was an incredible amount of escalation throughout the Trump administration that planted the seeds for the war that began in 2022. Trump was also against Nord Stream, outspokenly, in fact. The United States competes with Russian oil and gas, and that's certainly not going to stop on Trump's watch. In fact, that's only going to intensify as the supply crunch continues. U.S. dollar hegemony relies on maintaining a sphere of influence inside Europe. It is absolutely essential for dollar hegemony that the U.S. maintains a leading role in the fight against Russia. It's not as simple as we can pack our shit and go. For starters, that could be the potential beginning of a rapprochement between Russia and Europe because they won't have any other options. You could see increased trade between Russia and Europe, which would be bad for U.S. control. And of course, one of the primary objectives of NATO, that long-standing aphorism, keep the Germans down and the Russians out and the Americans in. That's what NATO is all about. Trump has succeeded already in ensuring that Europe pulls its weight in this conflict, even though Europe, in fact, stands to benefit very little from an extended conflict with Russia, especially if it goes nuclear and if that nuclear war is contained to Europe, which it most certainly likely won't be. But if the United States abandons NATO, which is extremely unlikely and is likely never, ever going to happen for the aforementioned reason, if that were to happen, you might have a situation where Russia says, okay, they make an agreement with the United States, you don't nuke us, but maybe we can't make the same kind of guarantees with Europe. Again, highly unlikely. Let's get back to this. U.S. image with NATO and all its allies around the world relies on continued support and being unwavering in their support for the Ukrainian cause. If they were to abandon it right now, why should any other country who's about to be used as a proxy by the United States believe that the United States will be with them until the end? We are only in the first 2 to 3 years of this. Think of how long the Vietnam War was, how long the Afghanistan War was. We haven't even seen the peak. The peak of this conflict is not even in sight yet. U.S. NATO secrets contained inside Ukraine may be at risk if Russia continues its advance. We don't know what's been going on there. We don't know what types of information people who could be captured in Ukraine would divulge to the Russians, whether it pertains to technology or whatever types of corruption have gone on there, which of course, many of people who are surrounding Trump will likely have played some role in or have benefited from in some capacity. And they're not going to be able to keep all of the hawks at bay, despite what Donald Trump Jr.'s best efforts. Unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of neoconservatives who are able to infiltrate the henhouse. Ukraine has the most battle-hardened military within NATO, and there is a risk that those people, those battle-hardened people as a whole, people who are accustomed to war, who are adept and trained and desensitized to it, could be integrated into the Russian military and start marching in the opposite direction. So for everything we lose in Ukraine, Russia gains, both economically, both in terms of economics, population, but in addition to that, they potentially expand their manpower, their seasoned military manpower, if they can incorporate those Ukrainian troops into their military, and they're interoperable because they both, in many cases, speak the same language, far more interoperable than NATO. So the last thing you want is the unification of the Eastern Slavic peoples. Sabotage attempts. If Trump decides to withdraw support, we will have more attempts to undermine this rapprochement with Russia and the United States. You're going to have hardliners, even within Russia, who attempt to escalate the conflict along those lines. And remember, there's no guarantee that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are going to be around for that long. Like, they're both aging people. They're both in relatively good health for their age. So we should expect that they would be able to see through their terms, but anything can happen. And if they get replaced by hardliners or people who aren't as motivated by the optics of it all and don't care about the country that doesn't want to go to war, then there's a high chance of sabotage, false flag provocations, especially between now and Election Day. In addition to that, if he does decide to try to pull away from Ukraine, he could be assassinated. And that's just a reality that people need to factor in. I hope that never happens. But there is a possibility that if he's going to be doing something that is in defiance of such a deep state agenda, then he runs the risk of being targeted by the deep state. And in fact, Russian officials have said as much, have warned as much, that if Trump even tries to end the Ukraine war, they're going to take him out, or they're going to do something, whether it's lawfare or another impeachment of some other bullshit to try to get him out of power, okay? Now, it's going to be more difficult because the Republicans have the House and the Senate and the executive branch. But remember, and what a lot of people forget, is that the majority of Republican politicians support Ukraine. Maybe not to the extent that the Democrats have been willing to provide a blank check, but the differences of opinion are largely in terms of how much aid gets sent to Ukraine, not whether or not we should support them, okay? Starting a war with Iran, which is inevitably on the table at this point. There is all kinds of news in the last 24 hours with respect to this, but I'm just going to focus on this for now. I might do a separate Iran-Israel update later today, if I can stomach it all. Starting a war with Iran puts Russian military support from Tehran, who does get their Shahed drones, in jeopardy, and incentivizes them to play a greater role in Iran's defense, thus increasing the acrimony between the two sides. Russia and Iran have completely removed the US dollar and the SWIFT payment system from their trade settlements. They are now working together on banking, so their currencies are interchangeable, essentially. And you now have them talking about signing a strategic agreement, which for some reason is continuously postponed, almost as if Russia is not going to sign it until they know what the United States and Israel are about to be up to, because they don't want to sign on to anything that they're not going to be able to back up. If Trump follows through with his 60% tariffs and trade war with China, not only will prices skyrocket, that'll be the good scenario, the best case scenario, but the shelves at Costco and Walmart might be empty. That'll be the least of our problems when we push Russia and China closer together. So this is a situation where all of these theaters of conflict influence one another. So if you push the Chinese, you're going to empower Russia. If you push the Iranians, Russia is going to get involved in Iran. If you push the Iranians, China is going to inevitably have to get involved because, of course, they rely on Iranian oil. Trump's last three appointees, Elise Stefanik, Mike Wells and Marco Rubio, who is not 100% confirmed, I might add. And I also want to say that we've seen all the hype and the buzz around Pompeo and Haley being a part of Trump's administration, and it turned out it was all fake news. Now, after the Washington Post blunder about the fake Putin and Trump call, which the Washington Post claimed happened, in which they had discussed a new peace plan that would see a 1,800-kilometer front line demilitarized zone that was policed by NATO troops, of all things. When it came out that that news was fake, that was kind of unprecedented. Yes, we all know the mainstream media bullshits a lot, but it's usually never that blatant. Like something, you know, where you're just presenting that something happened, for it to have not happened without putting any propaganda spin on it is very rare. So now when you have the New York Post, Reuters, all these major news agencies saying that Rubio is the pick, and you haven't heard anything from Trump yet, I would say approach that one with caution, because it could just be an attempt by the Donald Trump Jr. team in order to put the feelers out to see whether or not the resistance to the idea is in such a minority, which is not going to be significant. There are people who are being very vocal and are concerned about Marco Rubio being in that position because, indeed, he is a hardliner against Iran. He will have no problem whatsoever getting into a war with Iran. And despite some softer comments with respect to Russia, he's a Russia hawk as well. I mean, look, understand, Trump represents America, and we're in World War III. So, you know, this candy-coated reality that people are entertaining right now is really just a matter of, can Trump put the brakes on things, or can he move the energy of World War III into another theater? That's really all he can do at this point in time. I talked about how Trump was the first to arm Ukraine and the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, as well as developing intermediate range missiles of their own. They claim that it was the Russians who violated the treaty first, but the Russians claim it was the opposite. You have 6 top Russian entrepreneurs speaking on conditions of anonymity allegedly told the American news agency, an unnamed agency, this is from Russian media, I presume it was a fairly prominent one, that they see limited hope for easing the embargoes despite the Republicans' previous critical stance on the restrictive measures imposed by Washington. Now, I should add, there are many things that Trump has done that have been positive with Putin. And there's actually a list here. This is a CNN article, surprisingly, which talks about 37 of them. I'm not going to read them all off, but there were many things that Trump did that went against the grain with Washington when he was in office for Vladimir Putin. He repeatedly praised Putin. He suggested that Russia could keep Crimea. He made light of Russian hacking. He denied that Russia interfered in 2016. He was open to lifting Russian sanctions. He mauled returning spy bases to Russia, proposed a cyber unit with Russia. Trump's Syria withdrawal gave Putin a boost, etc., etc., etc. Nonetheless, and you can put this on a t-shirt, just like an MMA match or a boxing bout, World War III is going to start with a handshake. The thing about Trump is he likes to cut the bullshit and get right down to brass taxes. And that means going and looking your opponent in the face, shaking his hand, engaging in all the diplomatic niceties. But that doesn't mean that there's not an underlying hostility there and conflict of interests. So that ultimately trumps whatever sort of persona is depicted by Trump Here's Medvedev's comments, and this is going to be my closing remark because I'm running out of time on my phone. Isn't that incredible? No matter how much space they put on these phones, there's never enough. After Trump's victory, European leaders seem to be having a fall exacerbation. The goal is to push the conflict with Russia into an irreversible phase. One moment, the Frenchman, Macron, I'm presuming, crows about supporting Kiev if America steps back. The next, NATO officials pontificate on how to intensify the war against us. Now the German Chancellor candidate, Merz, who pretty much has the control of the largest party in Germany, which if it wasn't for coalitions would be running Germany, Merz has said he's issued an ultimatum to Russia. Either end the SMO, Special Military Operation, or the next day he'll send the Ukrainians German Taurus missiles. Ooh. It's clear that such ultimatums are merely election tactics. It's also clear that these missiles won't fundamentally change the course of combat. Their delivery would only prolong the agony of the Bandera regime, in reference to Stephen Bandera, a history that I won't get into. Nonetheless, it's associated with Nazism, okay? But the risk of escalating the conflict to its most dangerous stage with missile strikes increases many times over. Of course, Ukraine just the other day, and this was completely missed, and this isn't even news anymore. They fired 82 drones at Russia. 82 drones. These aren't quadricopter drones. They carry a sizable amount of ordnance. Frankly, he says, it's astounding how much the current generation of European politicians seems determined to drag the war onto their own territory, to the clear delight of the Americans and against the wishes of their own people. The vaccine of World War II has completely lost its effect. Experienced or even simply wise, European leaders have faded into history. They've been replaced by trivial figures with inflated self-importance, and so the worst-case scenario remains the most likely. I'll end with that. A supposed Trump ally or a Putin ally, a Trump sympathizer. All we're trying to do is get to the truth. That's all we're trying to do on this channel. And that means cutting through all kinds of political bullshit, both ways, right or left. If you want to support the channel, great. If you want to just lurk there in the shadows, leave negative comments, I'll take the engagement. I'm just fine with that. But just try to see the forest for the trees. Understand that everything that has happened in the last 4 years is not going away. The markets are going to crash. We've hit the top. And if we haven't hit the top, you should be very scared. And I'm not saying, oh, you got to cower into the corner. No, you're a prepper. That's why I told people yesterday, stop being a bitch. You know, like, stop getting so offended by these little, trivialities. Like, I'll never understand how somebody wants to get into a situation where I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. Like, I'll never understand that kind of tribalism. My brain just isn't wired that way. I'm wired to fucking think. And that's to my own detriment. I would be a multi-millionaire if I put on a MAGA hat. And I've said that for a long time. I would have 10 million followers, guys, if I dumb this content down. But no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to continue doing what I do. And all you people who claim to hate the channel, I know you're still going to watch in the shadows, because you know that more often than not, we get it right. And the reason why is because we're not blinded by the light of our own ignorance and our own political and religious prejudices. I respect your right to wear a MAGA hat. I would never look down on somebody for that, per se. But just don't get upset. The only reason why I would ever look down on somebody is if they tried to stifle my comment